right. Hey, Lisa, Stephanie, Diane, some others here. I'll probably be contacting you, Tom, about maybe we can get a roundtable session going the last half of April. So I'll be calling you, see if we can sit down and talk a little bit more on the youth project. We'll go ahead and get started here. Good morning, everybody. Thanks. We got a great turnout this morning. I'd like to call this meeting of the McLean County Behavioral Health Coordinating Council to order this Friday, March 12th, year 2021. Before you have the approval of the December 11th, 2020 McLean County Bhcc meetings. There were a couple corrections as far as the attendees on that. Other than that, they're for you. What say you? Is there a motion to approve? Motion by member Reese. Is there a second? Second by member Painter. Any comments or questions, additions or corrections? We have to take a roll call.
I was going to say, yes, but we also need to go back and take roll for the meeting. So we haven't taken roll of who's present.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll take a roll call vote here first on the minutes, and I'll back up. And we have to now, according to Open Meetings Act, we have to call roll twice. So bear with us. I apologize for that. The first vote I'm taking is approval of the minutes. You have it.
Mandy, could you please unmute yourself and go through the list? And when your name is called for members of the HCC, if you would please identify whether you are approving the minutes as Chairman McIntyre identified.
Okay, John McIntyre?
Yes. Yes,
Colleen Colleen Kennedy?
Colleen could not attend today.
Pronounce your names. Elizabeth Robb?
Yes, I approve.
We can do this.
Donna Schoenfield?
In present, same thing.
She is not present.
Tonya Reese?
Yes.
Lynn Fulton?
Yes.
Dave Sherrar? Mark Jontry?
Yes.
Diane Schultz?
Yes.
Kevin McCarthy?
Yes.
Joni Painter?
Yes.
Tom Barr?
I'm gonna take it.
Yes.
Karen Zangerly?
Yes.
Stephanie Barish?
Yes.
Colleen O'Connor?
Yes.
Lisa Thompson?
Yes.
Kristen Adams?
Yes.
Eric Tomey?
Yes.
Rebecca Foley?
Judge Foley could not be here today.
Susan Schaefer?
Yes.
David Taylor?
Yes.
Brian Whipperman?
Yes.
That's all I have on my list.
Okay.
Thank you. We have yes votes and the motion has carried to approve the minutes. I'm assuming that everybody voted is present, so we're going to use that as our attendance for this morning. Anybody else comes on the screen, we'll be sure and mark them down. I'm obliged to ask if there's any members of the public that are here present wanted to speak. I don't think we have any this morning. So we'll move on to our regular agenda at this time, and we'll go to item A, which is an update on the CAT team by Danielle.
And I will, before Danelle jumps in and shares her update, for a little bit of overview for those of you who may not recall or be as familiar. In 2019, the county, through the Juvenile Division of the McLean County Court Services, and in partnership with the Center for Youth and Family Solutions, applied for a Bureau of Justice Assistance Justice and Mental Health Collaborative Grant to allow us to concretely develop, formalize, and build a comprehensive assessment team within the county. Prior to that, some of you had known or had been involved in sort of the grassroots effort that had formulated and existed to meet some of the needs of high-risk youth and their families, with the whole premise being to increase care coordination through all of the multiple community providers that were involved in those kids' lives. So with that grant, Danelle joined CYFS to be the CAT coordinator, and has joined us this morning to provide an update to Bhcc about how it's going and where the process is at.
Thank you, Tricia. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So it's been a little bit of a lengthy process. Initially, we had to develop a planning and implementation guide. So due to COVID, there was some delay in that. We finally got the approval in January, latter part of December, 1st of January, and we were approved to start seeing clients and receiving referrals. Currently, right now, we have 2 male 10-year-olds that have been referred from school resource officers, a 13-year-old male, and then we have 2 16-year-old males that have been referred from McLean County Court Services. We had a total of 5 referrals. 1 child did move out of the area, so that's where we stand. It's currently 5 individuals. On February 25th, we had our very first wraparound session with the stakeholders, and we're able to do a wraparound for one of our youth that we're currently working with. And we did an addendum version for the single parent. So I am currently working with that family and making sure that all the stakeholders and agencies are involved and know everyone's responsibilities as far as getting the needs of these families served. I have a new client that I'm going to be reaching out on Monday. It is one of the 10-year-olds that I'll be meeting with. And so that's where we stand as far as referrals. They're coming in, which is great news. And our next meeting is going to be on April 1st with the stakeholder team. We are also working, Corey Tello and I have been collaborating with our contact with Illinois Court as far as what kind of information we want to collect. Data as far as mental health improving, our services being met, has there been an increase in access to resources, and then obviously sustainability and recidivism. So we're going to be meeting, I believe, next week with Suzanne Montoya, Corey Tello, and myself, and then our contact from Illinois Court to just make sure we have the big picture of what we want to really concentrate on as far as this data information. So I don't have a lot to present, but we're moving forward and I'm excited. And so does anyone have any questions?
I do.
Okay.
So how many clients do you anticipate, or does a grant provide for?
It was written into the grant for 50 clients.
50?
Correct.
And how long does a grant last?
It is 5 years and we are in beginning of year 2.
Okay. When you say you're working with the Illinois court, do you mean the administrative office or the juvenile court division? What do you mean by that?
I can pull the grant application because I don't remember off the top of my head. It was, what I do recall is that it was a resource that we were using to help analyze the data.
Correct.
Report back, and it was a recommendation from Cassie Taylor as we were writing the grant application.
Okay.
So
is it a data system Illinois court is?
No, it is a contact. Let me pull it and then I'll be able to tell you exactly who it's with.
And final question, when you mentioned recidivism, what do you mean by recidivism?
We're looking to make sure that the youth that we are serving are no longer continuing down the trajectory of having more involvement with police or school resource officers. So
They would have had to have a contact with the legal system in order to be referred to the program.
correct.
And what ages are you serving? That'll be the last question.
10-year-olds up to the age of 18.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And Judge Rob, to answer your first question, the program evaluation is through, I just closed it out a second, National Council of State Courts, because they had been used for other program evaluations within the county and court systems before.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Unless there are any other questions.
Are there any other questions? Thank you. I will go on to item D on the agenda, an overview of the 2020 budget expenditures. This will be old news for some of you, but for the new members, let me tell you that through our year 2015 IGA, Intergovernmental Agreement with the councils of Normal in Bloomington, we have a 1/4 of 1 cent of sales tax, municipal sales tax that is contributed. Mr. Rodriguez and I just appeared before the Normal Council. We'll be doing similar type of a thing to Bloomington City Council. And looking back at the report of the last quarter, the years 2020, the total amount that was collected since the inception of this intergovernmental agreement has been $17,606,000. If you need to jot any of these down, you may. Over 10+ million from Bloomington and 7+ million from town of Normal. Now that's divided into quarters as the intergovernmental agreement stated. So the 1/4 of the cent of sales tax that is contributed is divided into quarters. The first part is for debt service for the bonds on the jail, 20-year bonds on the jail that this sales tax helps to pay for, along with the county share off of the principal of the bonds as well. To date, $4,400,000 or 1/4 approximately of that has been spent. For that, we're taking a look and seeing if it's possible to refinance those bonds, but I'm told right now that there's a 10-year call on that before we can do it. So we're going to look into that just a little bit more. The other part is for criminal justice operation and maintenance of our jail addition area, which includes mental health and health services. The third part is our Behavioral Health Coordinating Council budgeting amount. We have, at the end of the year, we had $3,229,000 as a balance, but that doesn't include the money that's budgeted for this year. And Tricia's Behavioral Coordinating Council budget $1.4 million. So we'll work from that and go from there. The last part of this was set up through the Intergovernmental Agreement for Integrated Case Management, our Aegis system. And the Aegis system, which covers information and storage, record keeping for all of our county, including information for our police and justice services, still has the amount that was originally collected, because there is a committee, and some of you are on that, working to, along with the consultant, see what can be done to upgrade our Aegis system, because it's 25 years old and it was an ideal exemplary system at one time, but we're needing to upgrade that. We got thrown a curve a little bit with that, with our older system, when the state required e-filing through our circuit court system. And that really backed us up as far as what's going on with our court records. But there's also records for our sheriff's office and many others, as you know. You know, our plan was originally, some of you remember this, it was kind of our dream that we could incorporate as many things as we could with behavioral health for information within that system. We have been able to accomplish some of that. We'd like to be able to do some more. So that is kind of an update of where we are with the budget right now. Obviously, personally, you know, my goal is to get something done with our youth services some more. So we're going to sit down and talk about that a little later on. And I think that's about all I have, but I would entertain any questions about that, where we are with the budgeting. Okay. Well, thank you. You're always welcome to call me if you do have any questions at any time. I'll go on to item C, Department Organizational Chart.
Which I will just simply identify that a question had come up in our December meeting about the ratio of staff. And so I provided you with the department organizational chart that was presented to the executive committee of the county board back in November with my budget presentation for 2021. And immediately prior to that, in your packet was also a memo that briefly explained that and a few other items. So I did it more for informational purposes, but I'm also happy to answer questions if there are any.
Any questions? If not, we'll go on to item D. Sharing.
So one of the things that we have talked about in past BHCC meetings, as well as what is identified in the Mental Health Action Plan, is BHCC really being a conduit of information. And not only for the entities that are represented here on BHCC, but within the community. So we wanted to start to look at what could sort of aggregate data being shared on a regular basis look like. Again, we are not looking to share personalized, individualized, HIPAA protected information, and instead are looking at aggregate data, but having it be on a more regular basis. And also, where do we need to perhaps create efficiencies in our reporting? And so I'll talk a little bit about that as I share some of this. So I'm going to share my screen in a moment. As soon as I get my setting back. There we go. Okay, so you should be able to see a start of a PowerPoint that I put together for this morning. And I just want to illustrate that this is a sample, and it's really more just to begin the dialogue and to really talk about where we can go from here and what some of the short and long-term goals can be. So one, we have, so I reached out to both hospitals, and I can say that both hospitals have agreed to provide aggregate data, but to also have it presented that data represents the hospitals within the county. So it is not going to be individualized to either hospital specifically, nor will it be presented in a way that it becomes easily identifiable about who it may or may not have been as a patient. But as an example, looking at potentially the breakdown of emergency department data for visits by age, and looking at psychiatric ED visits versus chemical dependency in different age ranges, and then looking at the different years and beginning to compare and follow what the trends are. As we've talked about, not only within BHCC or subcommittee meetings, as well as even prior with some of the data-driven justice, we know that we can make more informed decisions with more data, be it about additional programming, where are services being most utilized, which age groups potentially are we needing to target more. Then looking at what is potential payer status. Again, the emergency department data in particular are random numbers selected, so they don't represent our specific data for the hospitals, but looking at what does the trend in private insurance versus Medicaid and Medicare or self-pay, so that we can start to have a sense of, one, does there need to be additional funding? Are there trends in usage and potentially even usage across different service providers? And then also wanting to, this slide in particular is also to sort of put something a little bit more humanized to the data, and to recognize that we are not just talking about potentially severe and chronic mental illness. We are not talking about the people that we may or may not interact with on a regular basis, but instead, these emergency department visits also represent mood disorders such as depression and bipolar. They represent anxiety, which could be generalized anxiety. It could be phobias. It could be a panic attack that the person doesn't know in that moment, and is later diagnosed as that, as well as eating disorders, instances related to trauma, substance abuse. But I also want to highlight adjustment disorders. So while many people as part of this meeting are directly involved in behavioral health, recognizing that in the past 12 months, we have lived through COVID-19 to date anyway, and that inherently could potentially be classified as an adjustment disorder for some people with the number of changes and shifts that we've all had to adapt to, if not perhaps a different or more longer term diagnosis. So I think it's important for us to make sure that as we communicate data publicly, we also help our community see that these are very relatable diagnoses as well. But then also beginning to look through what does some of our crisis data look like, and how does it look across comparisons? And I will say I sort of picked on the two service providers for crisis services that I knew were already reporting some of their data, and would have it pretty easily available without having to jump through a ton of hoops. So I reached out to both PATH and Mobile Crisis to just pull a little bit of the information that they already report back to the health department for some of their funding. So this is a graph that looks at the calls that PATH received broken down by age category based on how they define and break down age for the fourth quarter of 2020. And one of the things that I'll note here, because I'll point it out, that I began to look at is you'll see here that the highest representation is for the age range between 31 and 40. When I then looked at what the data is for the triage center, it is also within that age range. However, we have defined our age ranges differently. So this is an illustration of where we can go long term with data collection, data sharing, and data reporting. Is can we all perhaps define age ranges in the same way, so that when we're looking at what age group is utilizing a crisis service for behavioral health most frequently, we're all talking about the same age range. In comparison, and I'm gonna skip a slide. These are some of the demographics from Mobile Crisis for the fourth quarter, and their age range for that 31 to 40 is also the same age range as PATH, which clearly identifies that triage, we will start to shift how we're reporting our ages. That's one easy shift that we can make. But again, simply an illustration of where we can begin to have more dialogue about how to make sure that we're communicating the same type of data, and have more detailed conversations. Backing up just a little bit, PATH also reports their type of calls for the fourth quarter. They had 1,136 calls that were a direct link to behavioral health services, 238 that were still behavioral health related, but were more defined as support only calls, and then 1,513 calls that were also specific to McLean County, but were not behavioral health related. Some additional data and information to share with everyone are location of calls for mobile crisis, recognizing that, they have a bulk that are coming from emergency departments as well as that come through their number. The primary disposition of the calls. So what happens? Where do those people go once the mobile crisis has interacted with them? And that's a similar type of reporting that I've provided for triage. Again, there can be a lot of benefit to ongoing discussion about how are we defining all of these so that we can make sure that we are all reporting the same types of information. And that's not even getting into sort of some of the long-term goals of data sharing, which could be, how do we better identify who has used mobile crisis, let's say 5 times in the fourth quarter of 2020 and triage twice and called PATH 20 times. So we're not even getting into the overlap between services, but really just looking at, as a starting point, how can we begin to share information so that it's all congruent and can potentially compare a little bit better. Some additional information from mobile crisis are, where do they refer for ongoing mental health services and how is that represented? And then really just looking at their numbers. So they identified in the fourth quarter that they had 473 individuals from the county that were served. 348 of those were unduplicated. And one thing that is nice about how they report to the health department is that they clearly define what is duplicated and unduplicated. And so an unduplicated client is someone who has not received a service within that calendar year, correct, Tom?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, that's what I was going from memory. And then they had 125 who were duplicated, which simply means that that person received a service at some other point in that calendar year. And then they break down the average number of services per client based on their total number. So again, this is an illustration of the type of data that we can begin to bring back, given some of the other initiatives and projects that have been going on in recent weeks that many of you are involved with. There is not a lot of data that we pulled together right now, but really just wanted to be able to bring some illustration to what it could begin to look like. Also, and not to jump ahead, but just simply to reference a later point on the agenda, especially as we begin to get into the mental health action plan revision, the data will be useful for that. Are there any questions or comments?
Just a question, Tricia.
Mhm.
Are you bound by your grants to report things in a certain way that might be different, that would end up causing you to measure things twice?
Yeah, so I can't speak for, I can't speak for other agencies who would potentially be reporting. Our program specifically, so Fuse and Triage, I can make some modifications to how we're reporting that data, how we're looking at it. I do know that there's specific information that tends to be requested based on grants. And that's the type of conversation that would obviously come up in dialogue among providers as we begin to look at all of that. And then how easy or how difficult is it to modify that to compare to other agencies? Some may be able to pull the data more readily, regardless. Some it may be more of a manual process, and others it may just be more complicated. So I think that's part of the ongoing discussion. So,
Sonia, if I may, this is Tom. The short answer from the Center for Human Services is yes. And I think my guess is, I'm speaking for Karen here, since we get funding from some of the same sources, that's probably why, for example, our age numbers match up so perfectly, is we're both required to report it in a particular fashion, and they just have to correspond.
That's it makes life easier if you don't have to count things 3 different ways, but we know
Absolutely.
sometimes funders have a funny way of expecting it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Keeping with that, we'll move on to our triage and fuse updates. They have that in the packet.
They do. I will quickly highlight a few things for both programs, but largely say that the bulk of the data was in your packet, and I'm happy to answer questions about that. I will remind everyone on here, as well as just sort of publicly, that Triage is open from 7:30 a.m. to 3 a.m. And we have begun to see an increase in clients served. I am happy to say that February was our busiest month to date, and that we do continue to have individuals who are brought by law enforcement, and so it continues to serve as one of those original purposes, as a diversion to the justice system for folks, or from the emergency departments. But we also see a significant number who are self-referred, either for the first time or because they bring themselves back. So if they return after an initial visit, that second visit at least is considered a self-referral, as well as friends and family, followed by, on a cumulative basis, mobile crisis comes in, is one of our top 4 referral sources for triage. The majority of our folks are discharged home. And I think, so we have February data in your packet, quarterly as defined by Bhcc quarters, in between meetings. So that's actually looking at December, January, February, so that it's the most current that you're being reported to, and then cumulative. And so approximately 50% on a cumulative basis have been returned home after they've come into triage. We thankfully have not had to refer very many to the hospital, which I think is also a good sign. I mean, and again, also representative of one of the purposes of triage, which was to try to divert individuals who did not need to be in the emergency department and wasn't the most appropriate place in the beginning. To highlight a little bit for Fuse, and again, I'm then happy to answer any questions either about what's in your packet or otherwise relative to the 2 programs. We continue to use the data matching tool that was developed in partnership with the University of Chicago and the Corporation for Supportive Housing to identify the individuals who have intersected the justice and homeless systems most frequently. And so on a monthly basis, we're looking at the intersection from the past 18 months and then doing outreach to those individuals who usually fall anywhere within the top 25, really trying to target the top 10 individuals. We do occasionally get referrals from folks who have either been on our radar from other contacts, or who have intersected the crisis or emergency room or inpatient system and one of the others. So recognizing that there are a number of individuals in the community who have intersected systems that don't always show up in that data, which is where, when the chairman talked a little while ago about some of the big long-term goals about an Aegis replacement, including the potential for more behavioral health integration, that's certainly one of those pieces that could really be advantageous long-term. All of the participants currently have had a reduction in utilization across systems, and there continue to be improved trends in anxiety and depression measures. Our nurse who is on staff actually on her own accord, began to create a chart in each individual in their client file to track what the trends individually are. And so we're then looking at how does that look even just for the entire program. And overall, the trends are moving in the right direction, and people are remaining engaged.
Thank you. Are there questions?
Judge Robb.
Judge Robb.
Thank you. And thank you for all the data, Trish. question is, sorry. Maybe I'm missing it, but I see you have percentages of clients, but do you actually have actual numbers for the triage center? Did I miss it somewhere?
No, so I did include percentages. I do not have the numbers with me for today's meeting. I can begin to provide the numbers differently if that's requested.
I really think that we need to have actual numbers of persons who are using the triage center, and also broken out duplicated versus unduplicated. I'd appreciate that for the next time.
Yes, and and let me double check. I thought, so we had reported that in the past, and I know we broke it down. So we did for the quarter. So we did look at duplicated versus unduplicated for the quarter, and that's on page 23 of the packet.
Right, but it's not numbers.
Yes. No, I've made myself a note
Okay.
that the request has come for actual numbers instead of percentages.
Thank you. I
You're
appreciate that.
Thank you. Are there other questions?
I have a question, if I may.
Yeah, thank you, Bar.
Also, do you have an idea of the total number of services provided to clients in either Fuse or the Triage Center? How many hours of time your staff are spending with particular clients?
So, sorry, Tom, was there more to your question?
Just not on an average, but just the total number for the quarter.
So we have not tracked total number of hours. I mean, so we look at, so to answer first for triage, we do look at how long individuals are spending in triage, and we do track also how long their assessment is. So we do try to keep track of each individual piece of time that they are in, which would be representative also of how many hours staff are spending with clients while they're there. It is not reported in that specific way in this packet. Instead, it's reported by how long individuals are spending in triage. With regard to Fuse, we have not been tracking specific number of hours per client. I mean, we certainly have individuals who require more time than others, and one visit with them may take up 2 to 3 hours. Whereas there are some other individuals who have less frequent contact, still 1 to 2 to 3 times per week, but it's in shorter durations. But it's much easier to track for triage. With the way the systems are currently set up, it would be a much more manual process for Fuse.
Okay. And one of the things that you had talked about previously was looking at becoming a Medicaid provider for Fuse, since a lot of the clients that you're going to probably are either on Medicaid or Medicaid eligible, and that would bring in additional revenue for the program. What's the status on that?
So we have had our impact number through the state. We have our state certification. There were some delays in the full implementation of the EMR system, as well as then, even once it was more functional, some functional capacity for specific diagnoses and the services being provided. I mean, so as you know, as a service provider, providing CST, which is community support team, or even community support individual level of services are not the most frequently used codes. And so there was some adaptation to have to add some things after the fact. So some of that functionality within the EMR system has been much more recent, but we do have our impact number in the state certification.
So is the intent then ultimately to be able to bill for some of the services Fuse through Medicaid?
Yes, that is the intent.
And one final question, and thank you for all the information. With Fuse, given the clients that you're serving, severe and pervasively mentally ill clients who have at times, some of them, a history of non-compliance, Have you had many clients who you were got into Fuse who then left essentially AMA or chose to discontinue participation without it being an agreed upon thing within your treatment plan?
We've had one.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Are there other questions? If you do have a question, I please ask you to make yourself visible. It's a little difficult for us to see on the screen or speak up, so we would know as well. Colleen, I almost called on you. I thought that you had your hand up, but it was your cat's tail going across the screen earlier. Anyway, speaking of cooperative arrangements with different universities, one segue would be to go into our New York Criminal Justice Lab screening tool. I told her we made progress with that, and they're moving forward. And so if you could talk about that briefly.
Yes. So I've provided some updates in the past, so I won't go into all of the specifics, but just a quick reminder that we had partnered with NYU Criminal Justice Lab for a pilot that they are working on to develop a police screening tool for both mental health and substance use. And it would actually be one of the first tools of its kind that has also been validated. And so the first phase of the pilot was with Marion County, which is Indianapolis. And there were officers in the field who in phase 1 tested how long it took and the ease of questions, both on their part and how well individuals understood them. That phase went well. So we moved on to phase 2, and phase 2 is when we joined the project. Phase 2 was conducted a little over a year ago. It started in the very end of August of 2019 and yes, sorry, I had a brief moment of mixing up my years. COVID has thrown a few things off. So in 2019, and then it concluded in December, we did phase 2, which was testing really for validity. And so an individual was screened with the tool as they became booked in the county jail, and that existed in Marion County as well. So we both did phase 2 in the booking area of our local jails. And then either an intern or one of my triage staff conducted the mini. And it was a verified mental health assessment. And the outcome of the comparison of that data with the psychometrician that NYU has used for this project has been very favorable. And I would say if you'd like to read a lot more about the project as a whole, the NYU Criminal Justice Lab website has a link for the project and gives a very lengthy discussion about it. And that is a more recent addition to their website, even since the last time I provided an update. They were waiting on some final pieces of funding to be able to move forward with phase 3. Phase 3 is for full implementation in the field, both with Marion County and with us. So officers would then begin to use it in the field to pilot it, to then also determine where that individual goes. So that's the other piece of the tool when it used and implemented, is that it helps answer the question of divert to where. So maybe they recognize this individual does not need to enter into the justice system, but is the person more appropriate for the hospital, or is the person more appropriate for the triage center or the crisis residential unit, or does mobile crisis need to get called in because the tool doesn't give enough information? So those are some of the next steps. We right now are in the very early phases of just beginning to have conversations with law enforcement leadership, as well as the appropriate IT people in each of those law enforcement entities, about how the technology will fit. So NYU has their technology person who does also have a background in the justice world as well, to be able to move that forward. So we do not have a date for in the field implementation of phase 3 yet, but are working toward that.
Didn't we have some trials, or we were able to have some trials with local police on this, right? Correct.
Not in the field.
Okay.
Our local trial was part of phase 2, and that was in booking.
That was in booking.
Yeah.
Correct. So the key to this effectiveness will be how well it's received locally with our law enforcement leaders, correct?
Yes, and how the data comes out once an individual is diverted.
Okay, thanks. Next on our agenda is our mental health forum. I'll start by just asking a question to you to evaluate so far. Like we've had to make so many adaptations with COVID and a number of things we've had virtually. So if you could get any ideas, and any others would like to chime in on what you think, the pluses and minuses of virtual meetings, of streaming, of YouTube and everything we've done here in the last few years. I know, for example, that it's nice to be able to go back and call up and be present in something because our time schedules are so busy sometimes. So you ready to go for that one?
Yes. So in your packet, on pages 8 and 9, which are part of the memo that I included, gives a little bit of information about how many people we've had registered and attend so far, as well as on page 9, then the direct links to how to continue to register for upcoming sessions. We do still have some throughout the month of March and through April. So we were intentional to frame the forum as the 2020-2021 and to continue to have it be ongoing. And I would even say that while April is the end of what we currently have scheduled, I don't know that April is necessarily the end for 2021. It's just the end of what we currently have scheduled. So far, they have been going well. We have noticed that our registration and attendance numbers have been relatively consistent with what we would have seen in person. We have had a few sessions that have had significantly higher registration and attendance, but most of them have been pretty similar to what we've always seen in person at the forum. I would identify that the advantage of the way the forum has shifted to a virtual platform is by using GoToWebinar, it has actually made it incredibly easy to make sure that everything is recorded and then publicly available. And so there is a BHCC YouTube channel where we upload all of the recordings after the fact, so that they can continue to be available, and not just now or through the end of April, but on an ongoing basis, so that they continue to be a way to educate our community and refer back to resources.
This library basically, I find it as of vids, it seems to me could be potentially very helpful, not only to the average public member, but also I want to contact Mr. Johnson and some school superintendents and see what kind of use I could have. You know, as you recall, out at the Marriott a couple of years ago, we tried to get more youth involved with attendance. And this, I think, is a great way to do that through our schools and even universities. Yeah, it's helped as well. So thank you very much for that. Thanks for all you've done there. We want item H, countywide trauma, informed resilience.
Okay. So on this one, I am going to share my screen again, because if you are anything like me, you may do a little bit better with a visual. And I think it can be a little bit easier to help conceptualize what we're talking about. There are a number of people who represent BHCC or their organizations who are a part of this initiative. We did talk a little bit at our December BHCC meeting about this initiative, but this puts some items in a more concrete sense. We have a group that is probably a little over 20 individuals who represent social services, who represent education, who represent law enforcement, the justice system, as well as community members and individuals who have trauma as part of their experience, in addition to others, and have set some goals for what we want 2021 to look like. We know, and in part, thanks to Diane Schultz sharing what the Baby Folds journey was like, we know that it's going to be a long road, which is also why we like the visual here of a road. So it will be a journey. And we've sort of coined this as a potential for what our roadmap to becoming a trauma-informed and resilience-oriented county will be. And one of the things that our groups have really identified is making sure that we're not only making sure that our community understands the impact of trauma and potential traumatic experiences and the representation that trauma really sort of lives on a spectrum. So those of us in the field may talk about it more frequently as either big T trauma or little t trauma. To other people, it may resonate a little bit more as a spectrum of experiences. And recognizing the impact that that has on individuals, what it has on families, but also on organizations and the community as a whole. But we also want to make sure that people understand the importance and impact of resilience and preventative measures, and what protective factors can lie within an individual or family or organization. So looking at this graphic, to kind of walk folks through it, we look at the fact that someone had to start something. And in this case, I would say it is not a someone, and instead it is a group of people who have committed to the importance of this. As we talked about in December, this was really an idea that came out of the Behavioral Health Priority Action Team when we were evaluating the 2020 to 2022 goals for the county that fall under the CHIP and CHNA. And that group collectively identified that this would be important work to do. And there have been some key people out of that group who then are a part of this particular movement. And also recognize that there's some benefit to it formally living under the Behavioral Health Coordinating Council and its direct tie to the Mental Health Action Plan, so that we also make sure that it continues to move forward. Those people have then become the steering committee and are part of the working groups. So that's why that first box as a description is blue, but highlighted in that magenta color, because most of the same people who said, you know what, this is what we really need, are also people who are really doing the work. And I want to really illustrate that those groups are working groups, and everybody is taking an active role in moving things forward and leading subcommittees, and that it's such a collaborative effort. One of the things that we are in the process of doing right now is really identifying what our mission goals and slogan will be. What will our community language be to move this forward? So I'm presenting this kind of high level to you and as an example of an overview, but we're somewhere between sort of step 2 and 3 right now. We have a subcommittee that is specific to community language and buy-in. How are we going to get people and organizations within our community to understand how important this is, and what language do we need to use in order to do that? And so that's really where we're at right now, but then also making sure that we create baseline metrics and a plan for how we're going to measure it at the beginning, as well as an ongoing basis. How will we educate the community? What will that outreach look like? As well as toolkits for organizations, and based on different organization type. We know that what may work for a for-profit entity, perhaps in the financial world, is not necessarily the same that's going to work for a medical practice or a social service agency. And so we're also looking at what are our resources and recommendations given types of organizations and entities. And with that, and with your permission, Chairman. I would even offer it up if there are other individuals who are on the meeting this morning who are part of this initiative. If you have anything that you would like to add that I may have missed or is relevant, I would certainly entertain that, as well as any questions.
Are there questions? It's so difficult right now. We can't see everyone. So please speak up. This area of our behavioral health, I think, has become so important to all of us that it's something we have to follow through. And I'm just reading through the end game with this chart. And it's important that the community understand the impact of trauma.
Yeah.
And I'm still learning myself, but I know it just, my own experiences, my family experiences, how trauma-induced results can result in so many things, even medical types of conditions. And so as members of the Behavioral Health Coordinating Council, we'll come to a point, I think soon, very soon, we'll need to have our community understand this even better and be able to reach out to them and build this into what we're doing. And many of you in the work that you do understand this much better than me because you're hands-on. You do it almost every day, and you deal with the results and the impact that this has had. And so thank you very much for your initiative on this. I appreciate it.
Well, I also have to give a lot of credit to a number of other individuals who are a huge help and a big part of it. And it really has been very collaborative. And I know that I'm appreciative of their impact and their efforts to move things forward. But I think we all learn something from each other each time we have a meeting or a subcommittee meeting and a dialogue. Somebody offers a new perspective, and it's such a fascinating process, honestly.
Yeah,
So
I understand. Thank you very much. Mental health action plan update. Mr. Schaefer's here with us to join in. And so we can go ahead and start with that. Susan, would you like to start?
Thank you, Chairman McIntyre. Yeah, I think I get to wrap a bow on all of this this morning. I have been going through, if you go back, and I don't know how many times you've gone back and looked at the mental health action plan. I haven't gone back. I just kind of remember it. But it was pretty broad in a lot of areas. And we've had 5 or 6 years now with it. And to go back to what Tricia was talking about with the data, that is one of the things that right now I've been working on. I've had several of you and some others that have been active in creating it in the first place reached out to me. And then I've also reached out to others in very specific areas to try to get some data and to make like what Tricia said, make the data meaningful where we all are looking at the same thing. And so that's where I'm at right now. I have a 4-page outline. Every time I thought of something, I ended up finding another thing and another thing and another thing, because we have done a whole lot of stuff. And I don't think everybody realizes how much really hasn't been accomplished in the time that we've had. And then you basically almost have to take this last year and forget that it even happened, because I think one of the things that just as my perception, it kind of just had everybody just kind of closed up, just like we all stayed home and closed up and just kind of said, okay, we're going to have to, put everything on hold for a while. So I think we had made like about 5 steps forward, and I think we kind of took 2 steps back with the pandemic, and lost a little bit of momentum. But I think that now there's some hope for moving forward a little bit more quickly. Like I said, I have this 4-page outline in which I've now made more notes on after all the things that were talked about today. And I've talked about it with Chairman McIntyre and with Tricia, and we've gone through some things and have some ideas as to where we're going. And so in the next month or so, I'll probably, once I get some data to actually evaluate and look at, to say, okay, this is what we need to have a small group on. It's like Chairman McIntyre is kind of focused on youth, but I I have to look at all the other things too, to see where we need to go on that whole continuum. And so I probably will reach out to some of you for data, and work with Tricia on that with the information that she gets from different groups of people. And kind of along with the data lines, when Chairman McIntyre talked about Aegis, we have actually $3 million budgeted for this year for an improvement on that. And I am making sure that we keep that in mind when we come to data, because we do need to make sure that those that are involved in the justice system we can make the connections. And COVID actually, showed us a lot of things that we didn't really, not necessarily not consider, but brought some things to light that I think that will have more impact going forward. But one thing I would like to ask those of you that are the CEOs, and that I'm going to ask in some of these small groups questions, is to think about moving forward about capacity building. Because I think that with COVID, I think that we have to be very concerned right now with short-term and actually long-term capacity building. And when we're having these new initiatives, how those initiatives are going to affect capacity, and how they're going to actually maybe help capacity building. So that's one thing when I do reach out to you, or we have small groups and roundtables, that I would like to know about some organizational challenges and plans. So
I may jump in here. Last Friday, Susan and I spent the afternoon reviewing her outline and discussing a number of these things. And if you haven't done that and looked at the plan, the more you realize of the things that were written down that were accomplished, which was a good reinforcer for us, but also the things that we need to assess, reassess, and maybe redirect along the way. I'm glad at the time that, and some of you on the screen here were very involved in helping write the plan, that we could think outside of the box and do more as far as implementation and reaching out to the community. Just the example of the forum, Susan sitting here as chairman of our health committee for the county board, which we didn't have, but was as a result of the plan. This lady sitting next to me, Tricia, and her position that was created by all of you, and all that's been accomplished by having her leadership as well, and all of you that have been involved. I know we reached out to many of you individually at one time, and you became involved in doing this. We do need input. We need to continue to work on this together. As we first committed, we weren't going to throw it on the shelf. Implementation is very important. I think the assessment of our sustainability of some programs and where we can go and redirect with others, now is the time to do that. We can't get it done without the leadership that all of you provide from different organizations. We do have some funding that we definitely need to be very careful in applying, because as we know, once we commit funding, we obviously want it to be committed for sustainability for long-range programs. We have to be honest with what we're doing. We really appreciate, though, the input, and so there's time now to sit back and have some more roundtable sessions. Maybe if we can do that and get back in person, I can still make coffee. We got some donuts left over from a year ago, I think, so we can figure this all out. So thank you very much on that. I just want to know we have to rededicate ourselves and be committed for doing this, and I think we can make another step forward, one notch forward in what we've done with the community.
I've got
I also want to mention.
Yes.
Let me mention that if you're paying any attention to the news, sometimes you just kind of got to turn it off because you don't like what you're seeing, because it's just too much. And that's a mental health issue. You got to keep your sanity. But both the state, Governor Pritzker, and President Biden have made announcements about availability of money because of mental health. And so I think that from what I've seen and what I've heard, which is very little, there'll possibly be some SAMHSA grants and some other types of grant funding. So I think that we need to make sure that we're very cognizant that that funding is out there or will be out there in the near future, and they'll probably be very competitive. But I think that we also have an advantage to actually go after maybe possibly some of that funding that might address some of these issues even before we get the mental health action plan update done.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for your effort on this and the evaluation that you've done. Diane, you had your hand up?
Yeah, Susan, can you talk a little bit more? I know in the initial mental health plan, you did have a group of stakeholders, people that were helping to work on that project. And then I know there was also small group work. And some of those players have changed in terms of not being even in their same jobs. Are you going to go all the way back and reconstruct a large group and then have the small group working underneath that? Or are you just really going to do more small group work for the update?
I think more small group. I think that there's enough large groups meeting on a lot of different topics that are quite related to this, especially like with the CHIP, PAT, group,
right?
And then the trauma, and I think that there's that large group input there that I can actually get some answers to possibly. And then just really focus on the small groups, especially once we get the data, and then can focus, okay, what's next for that small group, in that topic area. So that's
that makes sense. Thanks for that clarification, because you're on most of these large groups. So you lucky person, but no, that makes sense. Thanks.
I'll tell you, Susan has gone way above and beyond the call of duty as a board member, all the things extra that she has done. Dave Sherrar, would you like to mention about, if you could come and join us here on the screen or not, if you're on, a little bit about a state level of a collaborative grant that might be available?
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I apologize. I can't seem to get my camera to work. It won't turn on properly, so I had to call in by phone, but I am present. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, a couple of days ago, the Health and Family Services Administration of the state, HFS, the Medicaid office, released, due to recent legislation, a big number, 150 million allocated to Medicaid transformation. And the application is due April 9th. What makes this particularly kind of daunting is that they call it a big table process. They want high levels of collaborative activity between hospitals, federally qualified health centers, and community behavioral health providers. Their focus is really on patients being discharged who are Medicaid from the hospital or from the ED who fall through the cracks. There's a lot of focus on reducing access based on racial disparity or other disparities. And so this is an opportunity, although it's just almost overwhelming to think about how to come together with a model or an intervention with so many different providers. There's some speculation it could be somewhat Chicago-centric, but they did identify 61701 as one of the distressed zip codes that they would invite proposals for. So the thing to keep in mind, if hospitals are not a part of this, it's still a possibility to get funded, but I think they're really looking at this bridging, hospitals, federally qualified health centers, and community behavioral health providers in a way that just improves the continuity of care. So thought I'd throw it out there if anybody has any ideas or interests in. April 9th is very short, but the other thing I'll mention is there is today at 3 o'clock, HFS is sponsoring a webinar to go over the requirements of the proposal if anybody wants to go to their website and sign up.
Dave, are our hospitals aware of this? Lynn just had to leave a meeting, so I just wondered if you know.
They are aware, and I believe, for example, I believe OSF is thinking about a strategy for their whole system, and not just necessarily swimming to normal per se, but they're looking at doing maybe something system wide. I don't know if they've come up with a plan yet, but
well, that's promising, isn't it? There's always something that helps with collaboration. Is nothing more important for incentives than money. So that would help a lot. Ms. Schaefer?
I have a question on that. Is this part of a waiver that, because I know several years ago they talked about this Medicaid transformation. Is this part of something that started many years ago and was part of a waiver?
My understanding is the $115 million has been sitting there, and it came out of the hospital assessment program. And then the governor signed a bill to release that 150 for this whole movement. I forgot to mention also that there'll be a second round of applications due September 9th. So there's 2 rounds, but the first round probably for those who can get something done may be less competitive than the second round. And I would have to believe they'll do something downstate. They can't put it all up north. So Central Illinois ought to have something come out of this.
Dave, this is Diane. I'm really glad you're bringing this up, because when I saw that notification, I thought about our area and didn't realize that 61701 was identified as a, hey, kind of the tip off, send an application to address this. But I just continue to feel that the county is in a really good position to submit something that would be very high caliber. We keep talking in our health implementation plan about how we need to drill down into that 61701 geography. So I really hope that we can pull some people together and work on something and submit it.
Yeah, that's a good point, Diane. What's not clear to me is who is the lead submitter, who takes the lead, and if it's not a hospital, how will it be viewed? So you're right. The key, though, here is getting the hospitals at the table and engaged in this.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say, if those of you who are interested in being a part of the conversation, if you want to email me, I would be happy to coordinate with Dave about trying to pull folks together to look at this and talk about what we can collectively do, and also reach out to both Lynn and Colleen to start conversations. And so I'm happy to be the one to convene folks. So if you would just send me an email and let me know your interest or willingness to participate in looking at it and being part of that. And then Dave, I'll connect with you after I hear from folks.
That sounds good. And Tricia, you may want to stick around it's a rather large deck that I did. I think you have this deck that HFS released, which is 50 or 60 slides on this whole project, which will give all the background people might want to see.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that, Dave. Anyone else have any contributions? Thanks. Susan, do you have anything else on mental health at this time? Okay, thanks. We'll move on to our last item on our agenda with the Behavioral Health Coordinating Council newsletter. Appreciate your effort on this, Triage. It's been great. Stephanie, I'm really going to have to get an education. I have no idea about neurobiological sensitive therapeutics. It's all Greek to me, and I would imagine the average person, but I'm very interested. Maybe we can get some roundtables and get some things going. We can have a chance to sit down and meet on some of these things and get back and exchange some more information. But thank you very much. Thanks for all of you and your contribution to the newsletter. Thank you, Trish. You have anything else you'd like to speak about?
No, I think most of it has been included in the packet or the newsletter or the memo. I feel like I threw a lot of information at you this month, so.
Okay, great. Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to add today with our meeting? Our next meeting is Friday, June 11th.
Lisa Thompson had something.
I'm sorry. Lisa, sorry.
Yes, hi, thanks. I just had 2 questions. Thank you. Tricia, do you know, I was really fascinated by that diversion tool that's being tested. Is that being tested 18 and older as an adult tool only?
Yes. Yes.
Darn it. All right. Well, that's a good, could be though, number in the future could go to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to suggest to NYU that we have believers in the applicability to younger ages, and may even have potential folks who want to be a part of a process if they ever reach a desire to pilot it to a younger group. But it is intended for adults only right now, and that's the only way that it's been validated so far. So
okay, thank you for clarifying. And then Susan, I appreciate you talking about capacity building, and I was just going to piggyback on that and say those would be great conversations. And I think simultaneously talking about the human service workforce would go with those capacity. As we build, we need a workforce. And I think that we're going to have to continue to talk about ways to attract human service workers to our community and to retain human service workers talent here in the community as well. And,
yeah, absolutely.
And how competitive we are. I think we're going to also see some fallout from COVID, where our frontline workers have been, working through this, and how that may impact their future in the field, being that they've been kind of out on the front line. So I know there's an economic impact study going on right now. It's the first one in 10 years on the economic impact of human services in McLean County. I have no idea when that's coming out, but that might be something we could look at if we wanted to talk about capacity workforce and the impact. So that was all I was going to say.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa. I actually, over a year ago, before COVID, I did talk with Patrick Hoban about at EDC about the workforce and in this area, and have not had a follow-up conversation, obviously, since then. And actually, I did see him last night, so I will contact him on that to see what they've done, because I know that ISU has also expressed a lot of interest working with workforce development. And so that is part of what I was going to actually put in I actually have it on my outline, EDC.
Yeah, it's been an interesting semester too, because the graduates this year weren't here. So usually, we have a group of college students in our community that's a pipeline for human service, but most of them were remote this year. So it's caused an interesting May graduation for people who typically would stay in the community, but they weren't here. Yeah, okay, thanks. I think the economic impact study is being put on by Illinois Partners, if I'm not mistaken.
Can you repeat that, please?
I think the economic impact study that's going on right now for human services is being spearheaded by Illinois Partners. I think Diane's saying yes, that's true.
I think
Okay.
ADC and Chamber are working together on that too,
Okay.
as far as workforce. So we'll get back to Patrick on that some more, and Charlie. Anyone else have anything else? Our next meeting, Friday, June 11th, 7:30. Possibly we could meet in person. You all remember those days? And if not, I have nothing else. Anybody else have anything to contribute? Not, thanks to you all for all that you have done for our community and for BHCC. Have a great rest of the weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay happy. We'll see you. Thanks. Meeting's adjourned.